Hello, I'm Daniel Goldberg. Today I'll be telling you about site-specific settlement in Soras. We know that many birds will vocalize during the night to attract mates, defend territories, or maintain group cohesion as they migrate. These nocturnal migrants may detect the calls of birds below and use these as indicators of high-quality habitat to stop over during the night. But how birds will use visual cues, in addition to these acoustic cues, to choose where they stop over remains uncertain. We know that if calls of the same species or conspecific broadcasts are played to birds that are migrating, that these birds may decide to settle in an area that may offer higher mating success or reduced predation risk. And likewise, the presence of decoys may indicate breeding activity. And so the combination of playback and decoys have been used to attract birds to restored habitats and increase populations back to an original habitat. Although this has mostly been done with songbirds and colonial seabirds with varying levels of success. The birds that we studied are rails in the family Rallidae, which includes many nocturnally migrating species, and rails will typically call in the evening, morning, and at night. We focused on one species in particular, the Sora, which is a common spring migrant in Illinois, where we did our study. It produces distinctive and regular calls at dawn, dusk, and at night. And the Sora also is attracted to and will vocalize in response to the calls of other Soras. It typically inhabits wetlands with shallow water and emergent vegetation, and it has even been known to breed in agricultural areas. And so we hypothesized that nocturnal migrant Soras can be attracted to farm fields, where they can hear conspecific calls that are broadcast, where they can see water bodies, or where both cues are present, which should indicate suitable habitat for stopovers during the Sora spring migration. We predicted that Soras would have higher vocal activity at sites where conspecific calls are broadcast, where wetland ponds are present, and the highest vocal activity would be where there are both Sora call broadcasts and ponds. We used 3 central Illinois farms: Illinois State University Farm, Franklin Farm, and Moog Aerosmith Farm. And this was a block design where we used 4 treatments per farm, and the ponds that we used for some of the treatments ranged from 0.5 to 1.5 hectares in size. At each of the 12 treatment sites, we set up an autonomous recording unit, shown in the bottom left. And this is a stationary microphone array that records all of the background sounds around it non-invasively during its period of activation. And we recorded between April 11th and June 1st of 2020. This is a period when Soras arrive in central Illinois and they're most vocal during their breeding season. Here are our treatments. You can see that the control group had neither cue, acoustic nor visual. The pond treatment had only the visual cue present. The conspecific Sora broadcast treatment had only the acoustic cue. And then the combined treatment had both acoustic and visual cues. We broadcast calls that we assembled in the program Raven Pro using downloads from the Macaulay library. We had 12 different sequences, 1 per site, made from different Sora recordings of the per weep and whinny calls, shown in the lower left. And we had 15 seconds of silence interspersed with 15 seconds of calling for a total of 3 minutes in each of these sequences, which is the pattern of Sora calling in nature. We broadcast these calls using portable game callers that we pre-programmed to play the calls on the top of every hour from sunset to sunrise, so 10 times per night. When we retrieved the ARUs, we manually scanned their recordings using Raven Pro software to identify Sora calls by site manually, which is faster than using built-in automated detectors. And we used field guides to identify the spectrograms of the Sora calls in frequency over time, shown in the graph in the bottom left. We then calculated the hourly vocal activity rate of the Soras at each treatment site. We found that 8 of our ARUs only detected a handful of Soras per site during the study period, but 4 of the ARUs, 3 at Franklin Farm in particular, detected many Soras during this period. In the graph of the Q treatment on the right, you can see that there was no significant effect of ponds, playback, or both on Sora daily calling rate. And this was potentially due to the small sample size in our study. But we did find that there was a significant effect of site on Sora daily calling rate, and that Franklin Farm had by far the most Soras, which makes sense because this was a Nature Conservancy restored wetland, where Soras have been seen in the past. We also found that Sora calling peaked in late April and extended through mid-May, which you can see here in this chart of the period of our study. Notice that Franklin Farm, in particular Franklin 2, where there were both calls broadcast and a pond, had the most Sora calls detected throughout the spring. We also found that over the course of each night, there were peaks in Sora calling in the evening and in the early morning. So our predictions were not supported. We did not find higher vocal activity of Soras at sites with broadcasts of conspecific calls or ponds than at control sites without these cues. But we did detect Soras at all 3 farm locations, and each of the 12 treatment sites had at least a few Soras heard over the study period, which were most likely making temporary stopovers during migration. We also know that from other studies that Soras will breed in wetlands of half a hectare to 2 hectares in size, which were the size range of ponds we used in our study, though generally Soras will prefer to breed in larger wetlands. The daily calling rates that we heard also fit the results of previous studies, in that birds tend to call in the evening and the early morning when population monitoring typically takes place, but also throughout the night during migration. The peak of Sora calling in April and May is when these migrants typically arrive in central Illinois, although their detection probability decreases through June as they mate and begin to nest. In conclusion, we found that not only will Soras nocturnally migrate over or stop in central Illinois farm fields, but the fact that they do so is useful for ornithologists, who can use the migration arrivals as data to help habitat managers promote settlement of Soras and boost populations, although further work is needed as to whether acoustic or visual cues are better at attracting birds to a habitat. Thanks for your time and attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.